Thank you so much. My name is Caroline. I'm a senior researcher at the Royal Danish Library. And I'm here to tell you that academic scholars are unable to make proper references to web materials. And today, at this first part of the session, we'll probe why this is the case, also why it's highly problematic, and more importantly, what we suggest should be done about this. So this first presentation will fall in two parts. First, I will present the empirical evidence for the claim, and then my colleagues will give you an introduction to our remedy, the PWID, the Persistent Web Identifier. The internet is getting more and more academic awareness, and we increasingly see that in research, e-materials are both supplementing and replacing physical material. And this is no surprise, as many of the phenomena that used to leave their traces offline now leave traces online. So to give you a concrete example, I'm a historian, and I'm currently engaged in a study on the history of April Fools. And I would not be able to write its contemporary history without including social media. However, as we who are all here also know, material that is published or produced online is highly ephemeral. And the web also tends to be more complex than other types of typical physical sources of information. And this poses a big problem to researchers like me, because being able to make a proper reference is key in academia. And why is that? Well, citations and references are the only ways to ensure that research results can be properly reproduced and also properly credited. And these are cornerstone principles in good scientific practice all over the world. So what is a proper reference? Although there is not one conformal system, some basic principles apply to all available and recognized citation styles. And these can be summarized as follows. References must contain all bibliographical elements needed to univocally identify and retrieve a document. References must also be immediately understandable, and then they must be produced consistently. These have been formulated on a research on the matter scope, but they can be further reduced to univocal identification, understandability, and consistency. So coming from both a national library as well as a university library, a few years ago we decided to conduct a rather simple test on a selection of Danish master theses from 2015. We wanted to investigate whether they would incorporate references to online materials at all, and also whether the references were still valid in the sense that they would now, 2 years after the thesis had been submitted, lead us to the intended content. So our survey was based on 35 theses that were handed in at the Faculty of the Humanities at the University of Copenhagen, and these correspond to roughly 3% of the total number of passed theses with the faculty. I won't go into all of the methodological considerations, but I'll just tell you that the results from our survey has been published in an English paper, and of course we would like to take questions on issues of methodology afterwards. But out of the investigated theses, they had a total number of 707 unique references to online material. And on average, each thesis would contain 20.8 web references. Now, these theses, they cover a wide array of empirical topics, ranging from Shakespeare to social media, but a number of these references do not seem to correlate with a particular topic. So this supports the claim that I made in the beginning, namely that the web provides resources to a rather large section of academic scholars, even when their field of study is not the internet. And also of interest here, it turned out that out of the 707 unique references, 111 resulted in an error message that the requested content or server could not be found. So this basically means that in this case, perhaps someone from an assessment committee or another academic scholar would be unable to check nearly 16% of all the cited web resources in this corpus. Similar results have been obtained in more recent studies, and it's not only, as you can tell, affecting academic output, but also, for instance, articles from the New York Times. But I'm relaying the results from our survey today because still today, me as a researcher from the humanities am left with no better options than the master's students at the time. The referencing standards that the University of Copenhagen tells us to use suggest that we do something like this. I don't know if it's too small to decipher, but I have here the American Psychological Association that recommends that you do something like this, and it's quite in tune with the Chicago Manual of Style. I've also added the IEEE suggestion, and they ditch the publication date in favor of a date when the site was accessed by the author. But ironically, the particular site they're using in their example was modified in August of 2023. So what version are we really supposed to look at if we follow this reference? So if we test these three options against the basic principle that a proper reference should live up to, they all fail miserably. And that is because the current referencing standards were established sometime in the late decades of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, and they were all made to suit static material. So in conclusion, we can confirm that the web is indeed a resource in academia, no surprise, but we also conclude that scholars are unable to make proper references to online material. So it's time to make a standard that is suitable for the 21st century, and that is what we have attempted to do.
Yeah, and as you can understand, I'm a computer scientist, so it's actually making the bridge between computer science and the humanities. So that's what we have done. So the persistent web identifier is actually already a standard. It's a formal URN, and I will look a little bit more into the standards. There are also some support to it. We're missing some, but we can get there, and there's different possibilities. So the persistent identifier is actually designed to be humanly readable. That's very important for scientists. It's also designed to be technology agnostic, so it can last for a lot of years. Also to be precise, because historians need that. Persistent, global, and automatically resolvable, so we can make some tools for it as well. It consists of pointing to the web archive where the material is, and then the key elements for actually the resource itself, namely the time of archiving and the archived URL. The precision is needed for instance, historians or other, and it can today can either be page or part. With page, we know it's an approximation where you have other files in it, and also if there are malware in it, you don't really want to access it as a page. Then you would like to have it as a part or a file, not as a rendering, but just a file. Here you can see IINA, that's where the formal URNs are registered. You can go in there and you can find the PWID description in there. And if we look at it and see the different things that it fulfills, it's precise, it's persistent, it's understandable. It's not yet fully access providing, but we have the possibility to make it that because it's algorithmically resolvable. The ISO 690 has recently been updated and actually think of the web references as well. And it has the same elements as PWID. And you can also put a precision in there, so the three first one are good, but it's not really access providing. Then a lot of standards say use a web archive URL, but the problem with that is that you are not sure that you can actually get to the archive at a later stage. It's not having any precision, and it may not even have the date and the URL in it. So it's not persistent, because we can see from the Irish Web Archive they changed overnight. They changed to a new provider, and the URL was totally changed. So that's also why it's not access providing. And you need to know that these digits actually is a date in order to understand it's a date. So it's not really always understandable. So from these, the PWID would be the best to choose. The history is that in 2016 there was this suggestion from our work, and there's been made a lot of work since then. Then it had a totally different name, but we were advised not to use that name because it's not a persistent identifier system, and people should not be confused with that. It had a lot of other precisions, like snapshot, and last year I found out that British Library is actually using the snapshot as a precision. So we should get that into the one specification as well, because we need that when you take a snapshot and put it into the archive. The registration of the URL was first as a URL, because I didn't know much about it, but it is a URN. It is a universal resource name. It's not a locator. We had a lot of work, and it was rejected in 2019, where the main issues were to actually find the archive, but that's a problem in itself. And the precision, there were too many things or possibilities there. So I cut it down, and that's why you only have part and page today. And then finally in 2022, end of 2022, it was approved. There is some support today if you have Solr Wayback, because actually Solr Wayback has a PWID service, so it's a URL, and if you combine that with your PWID, you can actually click on that, so it's only working for pages, and you can get to that page. If you want to construct, you go to the page that you want the PWID for, and you can click the toolbar and then PWID, and then you get all the PWIDs for that page that is included in that page, and the top one is the page itself. So these are, of course, specified as part if you only want the HTML, but you just have to change it to page, and then you have your PWID. When you construct a PWID, you can do it from some archive URLs. You can get the archive. You can also take the date and time, and it's a page and the URL. And resolution, there we have the problem with the archive. How do we identify it? We can go along already now, because it can be the domain, and we can get to the registry later. But we are working on making this registry. And then you could get the pattern, and then you could resolve it and click it. So another way to do it was to establish a general service. It could be like DOI, but that's a problem that you can only get to the pages. We could also make a web tool that could look like this. You could say, I want to resolve a PWID and get that, or you could create a PWID, for instance, with an archive URL if it has the right information, or you could do it with the information of the page if you have that. Right, so who should stand for this kind of tool? We don't know yet, but it could maybe be a collaboration between IIPC and OPF. I don't know. We will try. So which domain, if it's its own domain, PWID.com, or it's under another organization, that's something time will show. Another thing that it could be used for is actually in the WAC record ID. That it's required. It's a URI, and the PWID is actually a URL, so it's also a URI. So you could actually use the PWID as a WAC record ID. That was something somebody else had approached me and saying that could be an idea. So further work is, of course, updating the PWID standard, for instance, with a snapshot position, or if there are other things that should be done. Work with universities and referencing standards. There are a book and there are a journal paper that is using the PWID, so you can do it, but there are some that requires, we need to get it into more standards. We need to establish this web archive registry, and we need to work on the support and resolution possibilities. At the moment, you can get more information on this URL. You can also take a sticker, and there's a QR code that leads you there. They will lie up here. And maybe it can inform the WAC standard, maybe. So that's it.